Hey guys, I am here today to talk about Crime and Punishment by Fyodor Dostoyevsky. So, this was published in 1866. It is the second novel that Dostoyevsky published after he got back from his exile and forced labor in Siberia. The novels that he published after he got back from Siberia are kind of his most important works. Including Crime and Punishment. There's also Notes from Underground, The Idiot, Demons, and The Brothers Karamazov, among many other novels he published before going to Siberia, but those are considered his most important works. So, this novel follows Rodion Raskolnikov, who is a university dropout and is struggling financially. He can't pay his rent, and among other things, he's going hungry. And so, to get some money, ostensibly to get some money at least, he decides to murder a wealthy pawnbroker with an axe. And he also murders her sister, because her sister just happened to be in the apartment at the time. So basically, this novel just is a long study of Raskolnikov in the wake of that crime. Its psychological effect on him and his attempts to dodge the police. So basically, I think this novel is a long kind of demonstration of the effect of the idea of nihilism on the lives of everyday people. So nihilism is this idea that there is no meaning to life. There's no inherent meaning in the world. There's no God, and thus, because of all this, there's no objective basis for any kind of morality. So to speak, everything is permitted. Raskolnikov has a bit of his own version of this idea, which he writes about in an article he had published, where he says there are kind of two kinds of people. There's the everyday people who will just go around, live their lives, kind of do everyday mundane things. They'll have to abide by the law, and will die and probably be forgotten. And then there's another group of people who are kind of like great men who are above the law for some. They have some higher goal and some talent or intelligence. He doesn't quite say. That means they don't have to follow the law, that they can do anything they want as long as it's in the service of improving basically the material condition of humanity. And Raskolnikov, we can see that he wants to think of him as one of these great people. We learn that the real reason he committed his crime wasn't to help himself financially, it was to try to prove to himself that he is one of these great men. But we see very quickly that even though intellectually he kind of tells himself, he justifies his crime, he tells himself he's one of these great men, we can see that emotionally he can't deal with the horrible thing he's done. Something about him just can't cope with it. And we see that even if he doesn't know it, he shows a lot of remorse. So this novel is basically a character study of him dealing with this tension between his intellectual desire to be this cold-blooded killer who will do everything he can to do what he sees will improve humanity, and his feeling that what he's done is wrong. So, as well as Raskolnikov, we meet several other characters. We meet his sister Dunya, and a man he befriends named Marmeladov, and then we meet Marmeladov's family, his wife Katerina, and his daughter Sonia, and then we meet Pyotr Petrovich Luzhin, who is this wealthy man who wants to marry Raskolnikov's sister. And through the lives of these people, we see other examples of where nihilism can take people. If we don't perceive that we have any need to follow morality or to follow responsibility, we see what that leads to. So Marmeladov, for example, brings about disaster on his whole family because he doesn't seem to have much desire to hold down a job to support his family. So he doesn't see any responsibility there, and that leads to disaster for his family. Pyotr Petrovich does something really nasty close to the end of the novel to Sonia, who is a poor woman working as a prostitute. This Sonia is Marmeladov's daughter. She works as a prostitute to support their family, and Pyotr Petrovich does something very nasty to her, tries to get her arrested. And then there is Svidrigailov, who is another wealthy man, who is probably the least sympathetic character in this novel. He does a lot of awful things, both in the novel and before the events of the novel. And I don't want to spoil his ending, but he does not end up in a good place. But Svidrigailov and Pyotr Petrovich, I feel like it's notable. They both do awful things, but at least as far as we can see, neither of them is punished by society in any way. Neither of them go to trial or anything for what they did. And I think that is also kind of a subtle commentary on the way the wealthy are privileged. These two wealthy people did these awful things and didn't face any consequences except what they brought about themselves. Whereas the Marmeladovs are this poor family, and, disaster befalls them. And Katerina, Marmeladov's wife, kind of talks about this, how the unfairness of the world, and she talks a little bit with a priest at one point about God and how a good God can let this kind of thing happen. That's not a major part of the novel, but it is mentioned. So essentially we just see that nihilism will both affect society, could make society fall apart, because we'll have murderers and people who don't feel any responsibility to any of their loved ones or anything running around. And we see that, and I think see what's interesting about this novel is it doesn't just show the effects that will have on the people who were committing these crimes, the effect on the victims of the crimes. So we see that the pawnbroker, for example, died, but what is a bit more important is its effect on the actual perpetrator of the crime. So Raskolnikov, we can see his character changing a little bit. He becomes more irritable, and people talk about how he used to be so nice and now he's so grumpy all the time. We see Svidrigailov again, who is this seemingly unempathic character. Pyotr Petrovich also, he's not a likable guy. He definitely is out for himself, and we're not really invited by the story to like him. So we see the effect of this nihilistic perspective on both the perpetrators of crimes as well as on the victims. I did think partway through the novel, kind of, why is this moral dilemma relevant to me personally? Because, I'm never going to go murder someone with an axe, obviously. But, when you think about it, all of the horrible atrocities of the 20th and 21st centuries have been justified in one way or another. Raskolnikov's article, basically, in that article, he's trying to justify his crime by saying that he's a great man. This pawnbroker was doing something immoral. He can use the money he gets from the pawnbroker to help other people, etc. So he was trying to justify his crime. And what we see in the Holocaust or communism or religious fundamentalism is that people in the modern world do come up with justifications for their crimes. They do awful things, supposedly, in the name of some higher purpose. So I definitely think that that's a relevant moral issue to be talking about. You do get the sense in this novel, I think, that Dostoyevsky had a positive view of human nature, despite the awful things that happen in this novel. The fact that Raskolnikov shows so much remorse, especially, I think, shows that he thinks that people are generally good. But basically, what Dostoyevsky wants to show, I think, is that there needs to be some objective basis for morality. For him, that was religion. I mean, he was a devout Orthodox Christian, and religion is definitely the direction that this novel goes. But in my opinion, if you're a secular person, you don't need religion to have morals. Even Friedrich Nietzsche, who is like a really prominent atheist, a really hardcore atheist, saw the danger in nihilism. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot more I could talk about with this novel. There's a huge cast of characters. It's very long and complicated. It's about 550 pages in my edition, at least. So that's all I'm gonna say because I could talk about this novel all day if I went into more detail, but I don't want to spoil anything. So overall, I do highly recommend it. It's actually quite a page turner, I think. More so than the Brothers Karamazov, and I think it's a page turner because a lot of it is like Raskolnikov trying to escape from the police or trying to dodge the police. So it might be a good place to start with Dostoevsky for that reason. Yeah, and I will also say that I was also found the ending very moving. It had a huge emotional impact. Even I never cry when I read, and I didn't cry when I read this book, but this was definitely one of the more emotionally impactful endings of a novel I've seen. So I really liked that. So that's all I'm going to say, I think. If you want to find me elsewhere, I'm at Lukash's Books on Instagram, and at Tumblr, I'm at Reading on an Iceberg. If any of you have read Crime and Punishment and have some thoughts, I would love to hear. Thank you guys. Bye.